It was supposed to be another calm morning on CBS Mornings, fresh coffee, warm smiles, and polite conversation. But the moment Prince Harry took his seat across from Tony Dokoupil, the atmosphere shifted. What began as a friendly chat quickly spiraled into one of the most uncomfortable interviews the show had ever seen. The Manhattan skyline glowed softly through the studio windows as Tony, known for his composed and charming demeanor, straightened his notes and greeted the audience. "Good morning, America," he began smoothly. "And good morning to our guest, Prince Harry." Harry gave a faint nod, his posture flawless, his tone cool. "Pleasure to be here," he said, though the words carried little warmth. Tony smiled politely. "We appreciate you taking the time. How's life in California treating you?" he asked. Harry leaned back, crossing one leg over the other. "It's peaceful," he replied after a pause. "When you've spent your life surrounded by chaos, you start to appreciate silence, even if some people mistake it for isolation." Tony chuckled softly, glancing toward his co-host. "You've traded royal duties for a quieter life. Do you ever miss anything about it? Tradition, duty, family connection?" he asked carefully. Harry's lips curved upward, but his eyes stayed cold. "Duty," he said sharply, "is just another word people use to control you. Tradition is the rope they tie around your neck while smiling for the cameras." The air in the studio seemed to freeze. Tony cleared his throat, keeping his voice steady. "That's quite a statement," he said. "But your father and brother might say duty gives their lives purpose." Harry scoffed, his tone suddenly sharper. "Purpose? My family's purpose has always been survival, image management, PR, and the illusion of service wrapped in designer suits and empty speeches." Tony exchanged a quick look with his co-host, then pressed on. "Since leaving royal life, you've built your own image, documentaries, your book, public appearances. What drives you now?" Harry smirked faintly. "Truth," he said, "and independence. I don't have to ask permission to speak anymore. That's what terrifies them." Tony gave a polite smile. "So you feel you were silenced before?" Harry leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Silenced, manipulated, framed, take your pick. The monarchy runs on whispers and headlines. I just stopped playing the game." Tony hesitated, then asked, "How are things between you and your brother now?" Harry's jaw tightened instantly. "That's private," he said curtly. "But I'll tell you this, some relationships don't survive when truth enters the room." The tone was final. Tony nodded slowly, shifting the subject. "Fair enough. Meghan has also been under intense scrutiny. How do you both handle that kind of pressure?" Harry gave a dry, humorless laugh. "Handle? We don't handle it. We rise above it. People underestimate her. She's not just a royal wife. She's a woman with purpose. Maybe that's what unsettles people. A woman who refuses to bow." Tony kept his smile, though the air was tight with tension. "There's been talk, pure speculation, about new Netflix projects. Any truth to that?" Harry's eyes narrowed. "Speculation?" he repeated, his voice heavy with disdain. "That's your world, Tony. Mine's reality." Tony chuckled lightly, still holding his composure. "Just doing my job," he said. Harry leaned back, expression unamused. "Your job seems to involve asking about gossip and money. Maybe try asking about meaning once in a while." The silence that followed was heavy. Tony's co-host quickly stepped in, trying to calm the moment. "We're just curious about what's next for you both. Viewers love hearing about family, growth." Harry cut her off. "Viewers love drama. That's what keeps shows like this alive, isn't it?" For a moment, no one spoke. The hum of the cameras seemed louder than usual. Tony glanced toward the control room, then back at his guest with a tight smile. "Well," he said slowly, "we try to focus on perspective, not spectacle." Harry gave a dry laugh. "Perspective is just spectacle with better lighting," he said coldly. Tony smiled through it, his grip on the table tightening. The show returned from the next break, but the energy had shifted. Tony tried to regain control. "We're back with Prince Harry, continuing our conversation about his life and work." Harry nodded slightly. "Always good to be dissected publicly," he said with dry sarcasm. Tony forced a chuckle. "We'll try not to dissect too much," he said. "You've spoken often about mental health and emotional honesty." But by then, the tension had already reached its peak. Harry's expression was unreadable, his patience visibly thinning. What had begun as a polite interview had become a slow-motion collision, one that would end moments later when Prince Harry removed his microphone, stood up and quietly walked off the set, leaving behind stunned hosts, a silent crew, and the kind of live television moment no one would forget. The morning began like any other at CBS Mornings. Warm smiles, polite greetings, and the soft hum of cameras setting up for another routine broadcast. Yet the atmosphere shifted the moment Prince Harry took his seat across from Tony Dokoupil. There was a tension in the air, almost visible, as though everyone sensed that this interview would not go according to script. Tony, known for his calm professionalism, began with his trademark charm, greeting the audience and introducing his guest. Harry responded politely but without warmth, his tone clipped and his expression guarded. When Tony asked how life in California was treating him, Harry leaned back slightly, his posture composed yet detached, and replied that peace and silence were things he had learned to value after years of chaos. The words carried a quiet bitterness that immediately changed the room's energy. Tony tried to keep the tone light, asking whether Harry ever missed the traditions or sense of duty that came with royal life. Harry gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes and answered that duty was just another word used to control people, while tradition was the rope used to hold them in place. The audience could feel the tension sharpen. Tony hesitated for a second before mentioning that his father and brother might see duty as their life's purpose. But Harry's response was cutting. He said his family's purpose had always been about survival, about protecting the image rather than living truthfully. Every sentence seemed to land like a strike, and Tony's polite expression faltered just slightly. As the conversation continued, Tony asked what drives Harry now that he has stepped away from royal responsibilities. Harry replied that his focus was on truth and independence, saying that he no longer needed permission to speak and that this freedom was what truly frightened the institution he had left behind. When Tony cautiously asked whether Harry felt he had been silenced before, Harry leaned forward and said he had been manipulated, framed, and managed like a product rather than a person. His words were steady but carried the weight of years of resentment. Tony shifted uncomfortably in his seat and attempted to steer the discussion toward family, asking about his brother once more. Harry's tone turned cold, and he said the matter was private but that some relationships simply don't survive when truth enters the room. Trying to move away from the tension, Tony brought up Meghan, asking how they both managed to handle public pressure. Harry's demeanor softened slightly, but only for a moment. He said people underestimated his wife, that she was strong, purposeful, and unwilling to bow to anyone's expectations, a trait that seemed to unsettle many. His voice was calm but layered with defiance. Tony nodded, attempting to recover the friendly tone, but it was clear that Harry was not in the mood for soft questions. When Tony asked about rumors of upcoming Netflix projects, Harry's eyes narrowed as he repeated the word speculation with disdain, accusing the media of confusing gossip with reality. Tony tried to laugh it off, saying he was only doing his job, but Harry quickly fired back that perhaps Tony should try asking about meaning instead of money. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut through. Tony's co-host jumped in with a smile, trying to diffuse the tension by asking about family and future plans, but Harry interrupted her too, saying that what people really wanted was drama, because that's what kept shows like theirs alive. The audience gasped softly, and the crew exchanged uneasy glances. Tony, maintaining his composure, said that their program aimed to offer perspective, not spectacle. But Harry simply replied that perspective was just spectacle with better lighting. By now, the once friendly atmosphere had completely evaporated. Tony smiled tightly, the corners of his mouth twitching as he tried to maintain professionalism. The cameras returned from a short break, and he announced that they were continuing their conversation with Prince Harry about life and work. Harry smirked slightly and said it was always good to be dissected publicly. Tony chuckled nervously, insisting they would keep it respectful, and brought up the topic of mental health. But Harry's patience had run out. His expression hardened and his jaw set. What had begun as a polite morning interview had turned into a live confrontation, quiet yet explosive in its intensity. When the final question came, Harry didn't respond. He simply removed his microphone, stood up from his chair, and walked off the set in silence. The studio froze. Tony stared after him, momentarily speechless, before turning back to the camera with a forced smile. The show's control room fell into chaos, producers whispering, trying to salvage the broadcast. But the damage had been done. Within minutes, social media exploded with clips of the moment. headlines calling it one of the most uncomfortable interviews in live television history. Tony adjusted his papers and ended the segment with a polite sign-off, though the tremor in his voice betrayed his composure. Prince Harry's chair sat empty, a silent symbol of the confrontation that had just unfolded, and of a man who refused to be contained by anyone's script. The studio lights glowed softly, but the tension was unmistakable. Across from Tony Dokoupil, Prince Harry lounged slightly in his chair, a faint smirk playing on his lips, the kind that carried both confidence and defiance. "Welcome back to CBS Mornings," Tony began, his tone calm but noticeably tighter than before. "We're continuing our conversation with Prince Harry about his new projects and his relationship with the public eye." Harry nodded, eyes steady. "That's a polite way of saying controversy, isn't it?" he said dryly. Tony chuckled, trying to keep it friendly. "You could say that, but I think people are just curious. You've reinvented yourself several times since leaving the royal family. Would you say you've found peace now?" Harry's expression shifted into something between a grin and a sneer. "Peace is a funny word, Tony. It's usually used by people who've never had to fight for their own identity." Tony scribbled something on his notepad, his demeanor still composed. "That's fair," he said carefully. "Though some might say you've been fighting ghosts, institutions, expectations. Do you ever feel like you're still running from something?" Harry's eyes hardened. "Running? No, I'd call it escaping. There's a difference. Running implies fear. Escaping means liberation." Tony nodded thoughtfully. "Interesting distinction. But in escaping, do you think you've alienated people who once supported you?" Harry leaned forward, his tone sharp. "People who supported me? You mean the tabloids that destroyed my mother? Or the royal establishment that let it happen?" Tony lifted a hand, trying to steady the conversation. "I meant the public, the people who admired you." Harry gave a hollow laugh. "Admiration is just obsession with better lighting. The same people who love you today will destroy you tomorrow if it sells." Tony's face remained calm, though his tone turned firmer. "Do you think that cynicism makes it harder for people to relate to you?" Harry's voice dropped, cold and controlled. "I'm not here to be relatable. I'm here to be real." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut through. Every camera operator shifted in discomfort. Tony took a slow breath and pressed on. "You've said you want to protect your family from media intrusion, but you've also done documentaries, interviews, a book. Do you see how that might seem contradictory to some people?" Harry's eyes narrowed. "Contradictory? No, hypocrisy would be pretending to care about truth while profiting from lies. You might know something about that." Tony blinked, his composure flickering for the first time. "That's an interesting accusation," he said, his voice lower. "But I'll remind you, I'm not the one being interviewed." Harry shrugged dismissively. "Maybe you should be." Tony forced a smile, though the warmth had drained from it. "All right," he said tightly. "Let's talk about Meghan. You've both faced harsh criticism, some unfair, some perhaps self-inflicted. Do you ever reflect on your role in that?" Harry leaned forward, voice laced with arrogance. "You mean, do I take responsibility for existing? For being visible? For daring to speak when it makes others uncomfortable?" Tony shook his head slowly. "No, I mean how you've handled it." "When you speak about your family publicly, it invites reaction." Harry smirked. Maybe if the truth didn't bother them, they wouldn't react. Tony exhaled sharply, his patience thinning. "You know, I've interviewed many high-profile people, but few seem so determined to turn every question into a confrontation." Harry's tone dripped with sarcasm. "Maybe you're just not used to people challenging your shallow assumptions." A ripple of tension spread through the crew. Tony's co-host looked on nervously from offstage, unsure whether to intervene. Tony's polite smile finally vanished. "We're just trying to have a civil conversation," he said firmly. "That's what this platform is about." Harry leaned back with his arms folded. "Civil? You mean scripted. You ask what you think people want to hear, and when I don't play along, you call it rude." Tony straightened, his tone colder now. "No, I call it defensive." "There's a difference." Harry tilted his head slightly. "Or maybe I'm just not interested in your tabloid-friendly framing." Tony nodded once, his patience worn thin. "Right. Because asking about your life, the same life you've made public through interviews and a memoir, is now off limits?" Harry's expression hardened. "There's a difference between sharing my story on my terms and being dissected by people pretending to care." Tony's voice lost its last trace of warmth. "And yet you chose to come here, didn't you?" No one forced you to sit in that chair. The air grew heavy, charged like the moment before a storm. Harry's jaw tightened. Maybe I thought this would be a real conversation, not another ambush disguised as empathy. From off-camera, Tony's co-host offered to cut to a break, but Tony waved it off. Eyes fixed on Harry. "No," he said quietly. "Our viewers deserve honesty. You talk about empathy, Prince Harry, but the way you speak to people, especially those who try to give you a platform, doesn't exactly show it." Harry let out a short, cold laugh. "Maybe you confuse empathy with obedience." The silence that followed was electric. Both men sat frozen, the polite facade completely gone. The studio, once filled with soft morning chatter, now buzzed with raw, unspoken hostility. The cameras kept rolling, but everyone knew this wasn't just another interview. It was a collision between two worlds, one built on restraint and the other on rebellion. The studio was silent as Tony leaned forward, voice calm but cutting. "Maybe you confuse honesty with arrogance?" The words landed like a slap. Even the hum of the lights seemed to fade. For the first time, Harry looked thrown off. His mouth opened to respond, but no words came. Tony straightened his notes, mask of composure slipping back on. "We'll continue after the break," he said tightly, eyes locked on the camera. The red light dimmed. Harry stood abruptly, rubbing his temples. Tony stayed seated, staring at his notes, though his mind was elsewhere. Everyone in the room knew the next segment was about to erupt. When the cameras came back, tension hung heavy. Tony sat upright, pen tapping. Harry returned with a cool glare. "Welcome back to CBS Mornings," Tony said evenly. "We're joined by Prince Harry to discuss life, family, and the realities of public scrutiny." Harry leaned back, arms crossed. "Let's be clear, this isn't a conversation. It's you doing what the media always does." Tony's voice stayed controlled. "I'm just asking questions." "Sure," Harry smirked. "And I'm here so you can twist my answers into headlines." Tony's polite smile faltered. "You've done countless interviews, documentaries, podcasts. Are you saying everyone else got it wrong?" Harry's eyes narrowed. They wanted to. "Angry Prince sells better than a man who walked away from a broken system." Tony leaned in. "So everyone's the problem except you?" "I didn't come here for therapy, Tony," Harry snapped. "If you want gossip, call my brother." The control room whispered in Tony's earpiece. "Stay calm. Don't lose him." He ignored it. "Let's talk about your father," he said quietly. "Any communication these days?" Harry gave a bitter laugh. "So you can write another headline about royal drama?" "My family had their chance," Tony sighed. "I'm not chasing headlines. People just wonder if there's hope for reconciliation." "The public's curiosity isn't my responsibility," Harry said coldly. Tony's voice dropped, calm but firm. "You talk about privacy, but you've built a brand on staying in the spotlight. Hard to escape the media when you keep walking into interviews like this." Harry froze, glare sharp. "You're questioning my integrity?" "No," Tony said evenly. "Your consistency," Harry scoffed. "You journalists think you're clever. Same recycled questions, pretending it's deep." Tony's pen cracked in his hand. He set it down slowly. "I've interviewed people who've faced real pressure. Soldiers, doctors, survivors. None of them talk down to others like you do." Harry's smirk vanished. "Excuse me. You act like the world owes you sympathy," Tony said. "You've lived in palaces, traveled on private jets, had every door open, and still sneer at anyone who asks for honesty." The studio went dead quiet. Harry's voice rose. "You think privilege protects anyone from pain? You think trauma skips palaces?" Tony shot back instantly. "No, but gratitude should come with privilege." "Gratitude for what?" Harry said. "Being born in a cage painted gold?" "For having a platform," Tony replied, "and choosing to inspire instead of insult." Harry stood abruptly, chair legs scraping. "This interview's over." Tony didn't move. "Of course it is," Harry glared. "You don't understand me." Tony met his eyes. "Maybe not, but after today, a lot more people will." Harry hesitated, then stormed off, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Tony adjusted his tie, facing the camera. "We apologize for the abrupt ending," he said steadily.